Do you accept that that was an attack on democracy? Because I do.
Like Trump himself and Don Jr. joking.
To imagine, because just a few summers ago here, right? And so what
CJ, why? Let me ask you, CJ.
One side incapable of denouncing this sort of violence, the other very able to, and I think that's quite the indictment of the two ideologies.
Okay.
I appeared on Piers Morgan's show, Uncensored, Piers Morgan Uncensored, it's called, to respond to the aftermath of the horrific, terrible assassination attempt on Trump. And I appeared with a MAGA guy, I think you could call him, and it did unravel into a debate of sorts. The guy I'm debating with is CJ Pearson, who's the co-chair of the GOP Youth Advisory Council and the RNC Convention Milwaukee. And I don't know where to start. I do. Obviously, I'm going to play something for you in just a second here. But more so where to stop playing, because I want you to see a bunch of this. But I will link in this video the full Piers Morgan appearance, and it's like an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes total, everyone. But then I'm towards the end, around an hour and 23 minutes if you want to watch the full uninterrupted version of this appearance on Piers Morgan. It did get heated with this CJ Pearson individual, again, a MAGA guy. And interestingly, I sort of turned Piers Morgan on MAGA momentarily, because you'll see it. But I'm willing to say I think it would be a good time for all of us to reflect on our rhetoric and make sure that we're level-headed. But then CJ was not exactly excited about that and wanted to get right back to spewing a lot of really dishonest things. So with that being said, I'm going to play a lot of this for you. Because of YouTube rules, I can't just play the whole thing, because then I would be stealing someone's content. So I do have to jump in and make it original. So I'll be doing that, but we'll try to play as much of this as I can for you.
God bless you, Piers.
All the best. Bye. Well, joining me now is Luke Beasley, the progressive political commentator who was actually at the Trump rally in Pennsylvania when the attack went down, and CJ Pearson, who's the co-chair of the Republican Youth Advisory Council. Well, welcome to both of you. Luke, I can't imagine what it must have been like to have been in that audience for what should have been a pretty routine rally, and to suddenly realize there was an assassination attempt unfurling on the president. What?
And I go on to explain what I have in the other video. You can find that about me on the ground there. I played videos during mine, and I talked about how, again, I need to jump in just for the sake of YouTube rules, and then I have a long unedited version here for you to watch. I talked about how, while I'm going to get to, we can't do a false equivalency between violent rhetoric on either side, as some are trying to do, and we shouldn't jump to conclusions, because right now the best information we have is this is a former Republican conservative who may have donated to a progressive organization, but that also is not lining up in something. So we'll keep waiting for the full investigation to happen on that. But we're seeing a lot of people jump to the conclusions, and that's bringing up this whole conversation. You have to reject the false equivalency. So while I'm going to get to that, I did want to say, and I'm skipping forward because it takes up a lot of time and you can watch it on your own time so that we can get to what's the more engaging part. But we should all do some introspection and make sure that we're not throwing gasoline on the flames. And given the horrific nature of what happened, someone losing their life because of this wannabe assassin of Trump and murderer, it probably is a really good time to make sure that we are not needlessly being provocative ourselves while still articulating the truth about the stakes of this election. Okay, and then here's CJ Pearson.
Definitely a lot more somber than it was going into it. I think people are retrospective of what just happened this past weekend, which is, as you described it, indeed an attack on our democracy. But it's an unsurprising one, especially when you look at the rhetoric of the left over the course of the past several years. They've equated Donald Trump to Hitler. They've demonized half of America. They tried to lock him up, and when that failed, now they tried to put a bullet inside of him. And this is the type of rhetoric that has just been commonplace in our politics. And I would go to say that Joe Biden is the exception, is not the exception, but he is the rule. You look at him saying that he wants to put a bullseye on the president. You look at Reid Hoffman saying that he wants to make Donald Trump a martyr. You then see the advisor to Reid Hoffman going out and sending an email to the press saying we should actually perpetuate the false narrative that this was all staged. The left has not learned their lesson. They continue to traffic in this rhetoric, and hopefully you would think that after Saturday they would reevaluate what happened.
Okay, so unlike your co-panelist Luke, you've at no stage in that statement made any attempt to talk about your own side having similar issues, which they do, or wanting unity and to bring people together here. And this, again, this is part of the problem, CJ, I think. Actually, I applaud Luke for what he said. He made no attempt to pretend that on the Democrat side, they're part of the problem. You've ignored the part of the problem which is clear and demonstrable, which is people on the right.
Right. And then they go back and forth on that. I do credit Piers. He has done a lot of pushing MAGA stuff recently, but I credit him with their being able to identify that CJ is just getting right back to very divisive, provocative MAGA talking points, not engaging at all with what I led with. Again, you can see it in the full version, big multiple minutes there, which is why I'm skipping over it, talking about how it should be a moment to unite. We can't ignore our principles or stop advocating on behalf of democracy, but we advocate on behalf of democracy, as I said in this video, through democracy, not through violence. And so I'm hopeful that we could unite. I'm becoming less hopeful as I'm hearing more and more of the crazy responses we've seen. But here's more.
I just think if you're instinct,
Bringing topics on X this past weekend, how could you miss? Like, regardless of whether or not you want to.
Point is, by the way, CJ, after Piers pressed him, didn't change at all his views. And we'll get to the whole, we'll get to the talking points he said, by the way, in a little bit.
This past weekend.
Okay,
I gotta jump in here.
I tried, Luke, so maybe you can directly challenge CJ Pearson.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Piers. Super sad, CJ, that immediately you're just sort of back to super divisive and dishonest talking points. You said that people haven't pointed rifles
What's
at
dishonest, Luke,
Democrats?
about a member of the radical
like to
left?
say, Gabby, you remember Gabby Giffords? Gabby Giffords was shot, and then you also had more recently Paul Pelosi. I was curious.
Donald Trump president?
I was curious. Hey, I let you go for it. Let me. So Paul Pelosi was nearly killed by being bashed in the head with a hammer. And do you know what we heard in the aftermath of that? Unlike the response to this horrific attack on Trump, we saw people in positions of power within MAGA, like Trump himself and Don Jr., joking about this elderly man's head being bashed in with a hammer. And so I think I would feel weird with myself if I even walked out of this conversation allowing for the false equivalency. I agree, Piers, both sides need to be honest about roles they've played and be mindful of their language without completely ignoring important points we need to make. But also, there isn't an equivalence between the leaders. Yes, people online, I've seen some deranged people on the left, to Piers's point, celebrating whatever it might be, pushing conspiracy theories. I hate that. That's terrible. It should be denounced. But Democratic leaders immediately came out in unison and have denounced this, whereas jokes were made about Paul Pelosi. So that should be noted as well. I think CJ should really do a lot more introspection than what we're seeing.
Well, let me come back to CJ.
Yeah.
Look, CJ.
You're comparing apples to oranges there, Paul.
Yeah, and we can get to his response in just a second here. Let's take this as an opportunity. Someone reminded me that one thing they keep saying, I honestly hate that this is exactly where we're jumping right back into. It's sort of like, do you remember when the COVID pandemic started to rage? And there was this split second where people were like, wait, are we going to use this as a moment to unite? And then it all fell apart and conspiracy theories started going crazy and so as someone who knows we have to be dedicated to telling the truth and informing people, I can't ignore what are obviously dangerous and dishonest talking points in the wake of this. And so I'm doing my best, and you can feel free to critique, at acknowledging the tragedy and seriousness and gravity of what took place, being opposed to it, while being honest about the details we have at this point in time, where some of the narratives that are already being pushed about this being a left-winger aren't substantiated at this point in time, and also continuing the work of advocating on behalf of the truth. So, before playing more from this back and forth, again, if you're annoyed with me stopping, feel free to watch the full thing. Watch this full video, and then go watch that part with the link in my description. But whenever they say that people making comparisons between Hitler and Trump or talking about authoritarianism or threat to democracy, one of the points he made at some point was that someone said Trump was a fascist. Just remember that Trump always sends out messages like this, not to go through his whole record, but Happy Mother's Day to all, in particular the mothers, wives, and lovers of the radical left fascists, Marxists, and communists who are doing everything within their power to destroy and obliterate our once great country. People have been saying that saying democracy could end, you're to blame. You're to blame. Trump's constantly saying this, just to hold people so they're not hypocritical, right?
No, this guy we got a bad guy. He's a bad guy, actually. You know, they try and make him like, oh, he's not a nice person. I mean, he will go after his political opponent in a campaign, indict him 4 times. Today we got charged $370 million fine on a perfect loan. Nobody ever even heard of such a thing, using a statute that's disgraceful. These people are corrupt people, and they're bad people. They're actually very bad people. And we can't let them get away with it. We better win this damn election. I'll tell you, this country's finished.
So we say there could be a threat to democracy. Trump himself says the country could be finished. His running mate said he may be America's Hitler. J.D. Vance now his running mate. So can we just not jump to the dishonesty? And of course, this was Trump's reaction after Paul Pelosi, a crazy right-winger who was trying to get to Nancy Pelosi, bashed his head in with a hammer after holding him hostage. And this was the response.
We'll stand up to crazy Nancy Pelosi, who ruined San Francisco. How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know? And she's against building a wall at our border, even though she has a wall around her house, which obviously didn't do a very good job.
Laughing matter. Don Jr., as we've talked about before, posted that picture of a hammer on underwear, and this is gonna be my Halloween costume because Paul Pelosi was in his underwear when he got his head bashed in with a hammer. And then all these conspiracy theories were pushed about he was having a gay affair with the guy who attacked him, so who really cares? That was a lie, it wasn't true, but they pushed it anyways to make light of it, calling Trump's political opponents vermin. The North Carolina gubernatorial candidate, just off the top of my head, saying sometimes people need to be killed. This is the Republican candidate. Sometimes people need killing is the exact quote, in talking about the horrible nature of the left. You have Trump saying the enemy from within is more dangerous than any enemy abroad, talking about the left. I don't think we need to go on to illustrate the point. And then, of course, just to contextualize, because you're going to hear CJ continuing to push the idea that the left is perpetuating most of the violence. We still don't know if this guy's on the left. He's a registered Republican and student in his class. He's only 20, or he was only 20 now. So somewhat recently saying he was super conservative and a gun enthusiast and all this stuff. But also politically motivated violence is just far disproportionately happening among right-wing ideologies. So we can just be honest without immediately jumping into these crazy politicized conversations. But I tried my best to handle this one appropriately. Here's more.
CJ. Well, the truth is that Paul Pelosi was widely mocked and ridiculed in a disgusting manner by people on the right. That is unquestionable, right? And so when I see people doing the same thing to Trump from the left now, I think, well, yeah, but you were very angry when this was done to Paul Pelosi. So why are you now doing the same thing? There's a double standard that runs through a lot of
powerful Democrats, though.
Sorry?
No powerful Democrats.
Well,
Trump was a
I
powerful
don't really care if they're
Republican,
powerful or not. I just think that I just think if you're interested.
So quickly, because Piers is the host, I try not to just jump over him, so I can say it now, that the point I'm trying to make is there's a big difference between random people online. You can find people across the political spectrum always saying crazy things. That can't shape your worldview because you don't know how significant, how representative that is. But people in positions of power, like leaders of a movement, presumptive nominees, or elected leaders, then you can judge them more harshly, and it's easier to understand how significant different ideologies and actions are. And so the point that I'm making, as I think you already understand, but Piers didn't resonate fully with, even though he still seems to get the general point, is that across the board, elected Democrats, powerful Democrats, not people just being crazy online, which is still bad, you can denounce that, but not the same significance, have universally denounced this. Whereas powerful Democrats like Trump and a bunch of elected Republicans in Congress joked about Paul Pelosi's attack and have pushed conspiracy theories over and over again about January 6th. So, it's really upsetting.
Freaking topics on X this past weekend. How could you miss Like, regardless of whether or not you want to play this game where you it's not Democrat leaders saying this, it's not Democrat elected officials saying this, it is the progressive left.
Well, you can find a random person online saying anything all of the time. That's
Luke,
just
let me talk. Luke, I'll let you talk.
All right, go for
the
it.
base of your party is actively musing as to why they did not allow this shooter to finish the job. That is your party. That is your base. And it doesn't matter if Nancy Pelosi releases a flowery
Democrat.
Your party is actively celebrating what would have been the biggest, most consequential attack on our democracy in American history, at least in our lifetime.
I'm just curious, which prominent Democrat are you citing? Which prominent? Because you can find someone saying crazy things online in response to everything. So I hate that.
We can talk about
I've spoken out against that.
We can talk about Destiny. We can talk about Destiny, who's been
a streamer being deranged is not the same as the presumptive nominee of a party. CJ, let's be honest. Come on.
Well, I think a lot more people probably follow him than a lot of the members of Congress you're citing here, right? And so what Destiny said,
CJ, why? Let me ask you, CJ, why are you so implacably reluctant to accept that anyone on your side has done anything wrong as part of this debate? Because I find that it's a very odd exhibition of defiance when you've had your own leader, Donald Trump, show a very courageous act of defiance just after being shot. I think it was a remarkable thing that he did to spring to his feet like that, risking his life potentially again. He didn't know how many people were there. But your act of defiance is simply to ignore the bleeding obvious. I mean, everybody knows that people on the right and the left have done and said disgusting things, that they've all been part of the rising tide of...
And again, I'll get to the ending, I think, is sort of the best part of the whole thing because I get to give a closing statement. But even that framing is a little weird because it's not the same magnitude because of the positions of power framing and just when this is studied, online discussion, how prominent different radical views are in how they're being expressed. But I get that this moment, it's so sensitive that even just having a both sides conversation is fine with me, truly, because I just want everyone to come to the table. And already we're realizing, oh, even Trump has already left the table from his sort of unity call initially and is back to defaming E. Jean Carroll in a post. And it's just, just a few hours passed by and boom, we're back to the regularly scheduled programming. Really sad stuff. So if we're going to have these debates, then we do have to clarify. Undeniably, we hear coming from MAGA leaders, as I showed you some examples of, but barely scratching the surface, is way more violence provoking than elected Democrats. But it feels like a weird point to make in this moment. But again, maybe he's a conservative shooter, so we just don't want to.
Inflammatory, incendiary rhetoric. And I just don't understand why you wouldn't just accept that and say, yeah, listen, there are people on my side who are part of the problem too. And we should all dial down. You're very, 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 very determined not to do that. Why?
Well, Piers, I would say that, I think, as I said earlier, I think we should all be introspective about the words that we use and the fact that they have power. But I think it's also important for us to be clear-eyed about the fact that actions do matter. And the action that happened on Saturday was a direct attack on democracy that was inflamed and incited by a radical left that continues to compare this president to Hitler, continues to dehumanize half of America and treat us as if we are...
Another reminder, when Biden had red lights behind him and delivered a speech, people such as Marjorie Taylor Greene, etc., a bunch of prominent Democrats, or Republicans, I should say, said that Biden was Hitler. So let's just stop with that. Let's just be honest for a second, CJ.
Hitler continues to dehumanize half of America and treat us as if we are second-class citizens in a country and we're all anti-democracy.
Do you accept then that January 6th was an appalling act on attack on democracy as well? And people were openly calling for the execution of people like Mike Pence and assassination of other elected officials. Do you accept that that was an attack on democracy? Because I do. I think they both were.
I don't think anyone of any consequence was calling for the execution of Mike Pence. But of course, I disavow that rhetoric and I disavow, any type of political violence. But I think, again, we have to be mindful of who in this country is committing the political violence.
For Trump to be executed
on Saturday, after the attempted assassination of President Trump. On Saturday, after the attempted assassination of President Trump, you didn't see Republicans out here rioting, looting, and burning down America. Imagine what the left would have done. Actually, we don't have to imagine, because just a few summers ago, they burnt half of this country in the name of social justice. They're the party of violence. They are the party of terror. We are the party of decency, and we showed it in the way in which President Trump has called for unity, called for grace, and continues to deliver for the American people as he will this week as well.
All right, I'll give the final word to Luke on that.
Yeah, I think Piers and the audience, what you're seeing is a big difference between the pro-democracy movement right now represented by the Democratic Party with its flaws and this current MAGA ideology. When someone who I've spent every day talking about the flaws of being Trump, when someone such as him is attacked, universally, people in positions of power, elected Democrats, are able to recognize the attack that was on democracy. And we believe the threat that is posed by the MAGA ideology to democracy should be prevented through democracy, which is why we're against this. And that reaction, Biden denouncing it immediately, wanting this to see justice, comes in stark contrast to the conspiracy theories we heard from elected Republicans, not random people on the internet, post January 6th, what we're hearing here from CJ, wanting to further divide and spread falsehoods, and what we saw in the aftermath of the Paul Pelosi attack. One side incapable of denouncing this sort of violence, the other very able to, and I think that's quite the indictment of the two ideologies.
Okay.
You can't call yourself pro-democracy when your side tries to impeach a president, jail him, and then assassinate him. You failed all of those times. You'll fail again come November.
Do I get to respond to this, Piers, or was that the wrap-up?
You can respond.
Because I'd love to respond. Yeah, I would just say supporting an attempt to block the peaceful transfer of power is the most prominent example of an attack on democracy. And so universally, we should be opposed to attacks on democracy, not just when it's politically advantageous.
Okay. I'm going to leave it there, but thank you both for a spirited debate. I appreciate it.
And there it is. I do want to say as well, I've mentioned many times, unity is valuable. It really is. If it's unifying around a common set of basic, fundamental principles, like a dedication to democracy. In a democratic society, one unity everyone can have, should have, hopefully does have, not in this one, is a common dedication to democracy, right? So that's one example. You can sometimes have this unity around a common dedication to decency or civility. We don't have that right now, but you can have that. And then you can have a little subgroup. So I do think there's a group of people in the country, not extreme MAGA folks, but a group of people in the country, right, left, and center, who do have this common dedication to sort of a little bit more civility. And you have extreme people on the left who don't engage in that, whatever, okay? So same thing with democracy. Some people are outside of that group that has that dedication and you can unite around that. Some people are within it. And if we want to meaningfully unite, it's going to take both sides agreeing on and then dedicating to those principles. And right now, CJ is a good example of someone who's showing no interest in that, which is really sad, because sometimes tragedy can prompt change. But if this is a reflection of what we're going to see going forward, and I think it is, then unfortunately not much is going to change. And one thing I would say as well to MAGA folks is it's really bad and divisive to try to construe the left, as he kept doing, as who attempted to assassinate Trump, just as a group, because he said your party tried to jail Trump, your party tried to impeach him, and your party tried to put a bullet in his head or something. What? I was there, as horrified as anyone when those shots started going off. And most Democrats were horrified and opposed. So convincing your followers, convincing your audience that the people they should blame for that horrific event by a demented, deranged person, that represents that lunatic who tried to kill Trump, that represents Democrats, just rank and file Democrats, is violence promoting rhetoric too. Especially, I don't even want to say especially, because initially there's no reason you would say that, but you add on to it that right now it doesn't even seem like he's a left winger, so let's just calm down with that too. But I really think that's a message people need to hear as well. If we're going to unite, which MAGA is very quickly running away from, and many people on the left also have no interest in that, it would have to happen because both sides engage in that unity, not because we give up on advocating on behalf of important principles we believe in. But I'm willing to say, can we be more mindful about our rhetoric? Can we not dehumanize? But goodness gracious, you pretending like every person in the Democratic Party is the attempted assassin is very quickly showing no interest in that. And that's really sad to me. I am curious to hear what you all thought of that conversation. I was happy to be invited by Piers Morgan, would be happy to go on again. It was cool seeing him sort of take my side on some of those things. I do encourage you, so that you can see it just sort of in its natural form, to go to the link in my description, watch the full thing. Again, 1 hour and 23 minutes in the video that they have up on the Piers Morgan Uncensored channels when I come on. And I haven't been doing a bunch of these sorts of things just because the normal flow of our work is enough usually. But I wanted to make an effort to do this one because of how huge the Piers Morgan Uncensored show is getting. And so I wanted to reach that audience, especially amid this tragic moment, to show people those liberals that you see, at least as they're describing themselves on social media, being needlessly provocative. That doesn't have to represent us. And so people of all political views out there, I do think not everyone's going to engage in this, but there's a place for us to unite across political differences as long as we have that common dedication to our constitutional process, our democracy, basic decency, etc., and to move the country forward as a part of that movement. So that's sort of what I was trying to get across there. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments, and you can get the extra episode of the show daily by clicking the join button below.